Hi, I'm Christine, and I'm here to answer questions that you have brought up with me. And today I have a really good public speaking question. So I was talking to a client recently, and he was telling me about this experience of watching this presentation on Zoom. And he was talking about the fact that there were two different presenters, both of whom were using notes, that you could see they had notes somewhere on their screen that they were referring to. But one presenter really sounded like he was reading and really wasn't connecting with his audience. And one presenter seemed to be able to use those notes, but really sound like she was talking and was really connecting with the audience. And the question was, what's the difference here? How do I use notes in a way that help me really connect with my audience versus just sort of sound like I'm talking to an audience that's not even there? And this is a great question, and it's a question that comes up a lot when working on public speaking, is do I use notes, how do I use notes, and how do I use notes effectively? So let me start by saying you don't have to memorize everything you say when you speak publicly. There definitely is a way to use notes in a way that helps you enhance the connection with your audience, while at the same time still feeling like you have backup if you are starting to forget where you are going next. So there's no need to memorize. And at the same time, our reading voice is very different than our speaking voice. So in terms of using notes effectively, it's not a great idea to just type up exactly what you're going to say and count on your ability to just be able to read it. And here's why. First of all, because of something I just said, we speak differently than how we write. So if you're just writing something down, you're probably using more of your writing voice, and it's not necessarily going to come across as well if you're finding that you're having to read it, especially if what you're doing in the end is simply just reading your notes. We can pick up right away when somebody is reading something versus actually talking to us because the voice just sounds different. So while notes can be effective, if that's your plan, it's not going to go so well. So there are three key factors here that are really going to make the difference. And they are, how are you structuring your notes? How are you practicing with your notes? And connecting with your audience and building that into your practice. In terms of the structure, some people find that they can just write those whole scripts and then practice enough so that they don't have to read them. That is okay and useful, but for some people it can be tricky because you can get lost within that script. So it's really important to find a way of structuring your notes so that you can easily reference them without having to read them all the way through. Bullet points can be super useful for this. Mind maps can be super useful for this. So finding a way, there's no one way. Finding a way for you that allows you to easily reference your notes without falling back on, ooh, if I don't read this word for word, I'm going to get lost, is super, super important. And that really goes into the next tip, which is practice. A lot of people feel like, or have this misconception around rehearsal or practice. They feel like if they rehearse, they're not going to be able to be authentic in the moment. And it's actually the opposite. So if we use acting and rehearsals when performing a play as a metaphor, actors rehearse a play for 3 to 4 to 6 weeks so that they can walk on stage and look like everything that's happening is spontaneous and in the moment. Spontaneity requires rehearsal. If you haven't rehearsed and practiced with your notes, and when I say practice, I mean if you haven't spoken it out loud, then you're going to be spending the whole communication act thinking about how you're saying what you're saying and having to reference your notes quite frequently, which isn't going to allow you to connect with your audience and is going to make you fall back a lot more on habits like, oh, I'm going to need to read this word for word, especially if you're nervous because you're going to be really too worried to look away from the notes. So rehearsal is what actually allows us to be our most confident selves, because it gets our message into our muscle memory, and we're not having to think so much about what's the next thing I want to say, because we've actually practiced it in the body. The more you've practiced it in the body, the more you can let go of the notes. And practicing with your notes also helps you figure out when is a good time to reference the notes so that I'm not breaking that connection with my audience. Which then gets me to the final point. And the final point is connecting with your audience is really important when you're speaking. We can't just hear the difference when you're reading between when you're speaking, but we can also see the difference. If you are spending the whole time reading your notes, your voice isn't going to have the same kind of intonation patterns as when you're actually looking at the people you're talking to when you speak. Because when you're relationally connecting with who you're talking to, the prosody of your voice, or the melodic ups and downs of your voice, is going to change based on the response you're getting from who you're talking to. Your body is more naturally and organically going to start to tell what you're trying to say to who you're talking to, rather than reading at them. And we can really feel that difference because we start to feel more involved in what you're saying when you're speaking to us rather than reading at us. And we can tell that you're speaking to us because you're making eye contact with us, you're seeing our responses, you're acknowledging our responses. And that doesn't mean you can't have notes too. It's just about when you're referencing the notes and when you're looking at who you're talking to. And of course, if you're talking to a bigger crowd, making sure that you are spending time making eye contact with different individuals within that crowd. On Zoom, of course, that can mean spending time looking at different people on the screen. That just helps get your social connection aspect of your nervous system online, so that you're much more likely to, even if you've got notes, be able to tailor them to who you're specifically talking to and the reactions that they're having. Whereas if you're too busy reading what you're trying to say, you're going to miss those cues. And it's going to be as if the audience isn't even there, and they're going to feel that. So it's not a problem working with notes, but the keys are you structuring your notes in a way that you can easily reference them? You're not feeling like you have to read them from beginning to end. Are you rehearsing with your notes so that you feel really confident about what you're saying, so that they're really just a reference for you and you can spend the majority of your time really focusing on who you're talking to and what you want them to get from what you're trying to say? That's what makes the difference. And then notes are just there if you happen to get lost, or just to make sure that you're really following the structure in a way that you've set up. They're not the thing you need to cling to. And rehearsal is what makes all the difference in terms of that. So it's a great question. It really is an art. Public speaking is not necessarily something that comes naturally, even though it can look really natural when it's rehearsed. That's where training is really useful. And of course, I'm always here if you'd like some training. Feel free to reach out at Christine@voicewhatmatters.com. If not with me, then I'm happy to refer you on to there are so many really wonderful public speaking coaches. It's a great thing to get good at. It's something we can all be good at. We don't have to live in terror of it. So do reach out if you feel like you'd like some coaching. Thank you for the question, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.